Dana, can you take us back to that mountain vacation in the moment that you realized retirement wasn't just a financial planning problem, but a life planning problem?
Absolutely. I remember it crystal clear. I was in Beaver Creek, Colorado, one of our favorite places to go. And normally, after a few days off work, I'm antsy to get back and be working on something. And we were there just over 2 weeks, and I never got that feeling. And it was the first time toward the end of the vacation where I thought, oh my gosh, like this is what a joyful retirement could feel like, out hiking in nature every day, just leisure time every day. Now, I did do some work on this trip, but it was at a reasonable pace. It wasn't crammed in where you're constantly looking at your calendar to make sure you're ready for the next thing. And so it was the first time I connected emotionally to the idea of retirement. I had done my financial plan every single year because I'm a financial planner and I don't want to be a hypocrite. And so, of course, I know my numbers and I know what's possible, but I didn't have any emotional connection to it. It was someday, maybe I'll work till I'm 70. And that was the first time where I began to consciously think about what my path might look like. Now, that was now almost 2 years ago where I had that experience. And it's been really interesting to see how my thoughts and path have evolved. But what that started was this just thinking about it in a more intentional way and realizing, how am I going to design this for myself in a way that's going to work?
So it's important for us to keep our eyes and ears open and really thinking to the future. One of the biggest ideas in your book is the pre-go phase, the decade before retirement. Why do you believe those 10 years are actually more important than the day someone retires?
Yeah, it's like the foundation, just like building a house, the time invested in doing the plans and the engineering work, that all has to happen before you can begin the framing. And so I think of that 10 years as the time where you're not only getting a handle on your numbers and understanding what's possible, that can help if early retirement is placed upon you. So a lot of the research shows that while people may plan to work till 65 or 67, often retirement happens several years earlier. So the planning is important to help have some contingencies in place for those kinds of risks. It also helps you prepare emotionally, the work that I've been doing of figuring out, well, how do I start by taking more time off along the way? How do I begin thinking about the things that light me up, and what, my identity is, founder and CEO and author, you know, how do I think about what it is beyond that and where my joy and purpose will come from? And that's going to take a long time for me. That isn't going to be one day there's work and the next day there's not, which I realize happens for a lot of corporate people. If that's your situation, you want to give yourself a lot of grace in that first early retirement period to do the work to figure this out. For those of us who have time to think about it ahead of time, I think it's just critical just to get your mind wrapped around it and begin looking and being open-minded about what that new time in life may be like.
So if someone is 5 to 10 years away from retirement today, those are some of the conversations that you think they should be having with themselves and maybe their spouse?
Absolutely. My husband just literally last week was like, so, what are your latest thoughts on retirement? Of course, he hears me talking about it all the time. And so we did have a conversation about it. And while I still think I will probably work and be involved in my business in some capacity till 70, we have a bit more of a cohesive plan now. It in some ways revolves around our dog. So our dog is 10 years old. And so we kind of thought, okay, we'd really like to spend summers. We're in Arizona, in Phoenix, Scottsdale. And so we'd really like to spend summers in the mountains. And so, but realistically, when is that going to be possible? Well, not until our current dog has passed. And so that started to outline a timeline for us of, okay, in the next few years, how do I intentionally schedule? I just did a remote work week from Beaver Creek. And so that was just like a little oasis for me of working at a reasonable pace. And then we scheduled a week in Hawaii later in the year. And so we're trying to be a lot more intentional about scheduling some of those things now, and then having a timeline. Okay, so when our dog passes, our next phase would be figuring out a plan where we can spend summers elsewhere. And then from 65 perhaps to 70, what would that piece look like? So I'm starting to segment it out so that I can be really conscious about what we want to do while we're able to, and then what the later phases may look like.
Yeah, that's really good. Are you seeing that more commonly? I have a client who, they had been planning more traditionally, okay, we're going to retire at 65, but they called me recently and said, oh, we talked about how we love going camping, we love going hiking, and last year they went on a big hiking trip with a couple of friends of theirs, and they came home and said, our realization was that we need to take these hiking trips now while we're physically capable, because their friends are a little bit older than they are, and we're struggling on some of those hikes. So my clients came back and said, can we plan to take more of those trips now? And we can always work a little bit longer if we have to. They're both in medical, they're nurses. And they said, you know what? Nurses are in high demand. We feel like we can probably get a job anywhere we go. And if we come back to it later, we can, but we want to go hiking now.
Yeah, I love that. I think I've seen all kinds of things. I've seen a lot of people, particularly in the medical field, as your situation you just described, where they do have the flexibility to scale down over time and might go from 5 to 4 days and then 3 and then 2. And I absolutely love that. I've seen many others in the corporate world where it's a completely different path. They don't have that flexibility. And so theirs is more of the one day the work, the next day there's not. I do think because of podcasts like yours, Christine Benz's book, How to Retire, has a whole section where she talks with Jamie Hopkins about this, how some people may not, toward the last few years, may not need to contribute as much to their 401k or maximize their savings anymore, and instead use that money to go camping more or take those vacations while they're able. Or maybe it's hiring more help around the house to make the work-life balance feel a little bit more reasonable. I think that's being thought of more, again, because of, all of the media and ability for people to share ideas that we have today.
Most people track their net worth for decades. At what point should they stop obsessing over accumulating assets and start thinking about creating income instead?
I think that's part of that pre-go phase of really realizing that it becomes more around risk management and cash flow certainty. And so we're conditioned to measure everything. I mean, even the requirements in our industry to, produce performance rates of return. Everybody's conditioned to compare based on rate of return. But what you really need is cash flow certainty in retirement. And it's a completely different way of managing risk. There are all kinds of risks that we face. Longevity, living long, is one of the key risks in retirement. And one of my pet peeves, for example, is, when people compare Social Security claiming to other options based on the rate of return you can earn in the market. Well, Social Security claiming can help hedge some very unique risks around living long and inflation protection that other things can't do. And so, Andy, I completely forgot what your original question was. My mind just kind of spiraled.
No, I think you answered it. The question was about, when should they stop thinking about accumulating and focusing more on income?
Yeah, it's in that first 10 years. And if it hasn't happened by then it's those first few years of retirement where you really have to realize, hey, these parameters have changed.
Good pre-go homework. Let's go to segment 2.